What if I told you that the pain you've been carrying, the silence you've been hearing, and the restlessness you can't explain are not accidents? What if all of it is God trying to reach you, not with thunder, not with answers wrapped in lightning, but with a whisper, a nudge, a moment that feels small until it changes everything? Don't scroll past this, because in the next few minutes, you might finally understand why your heart has been aching for something more. And what you hear today just might be the message you didn't know you were waiting for. You think you've been moving through life on your own? You think all those missed signals, the near crashes, the moments when everything suddenly felt still in a room full of noise meant nothing. But I have to ask you something. What if those weren't just coincidences? What if the quiet shiver running down your spine that day, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the single tear that dropped out of nowhere during your commute were not just human emotion? What if they were me? What if I've been trying to reach you? This isn't your imagination. It's not the chill of the AC or an overactive mind. This is divine pursuit. I have been calling out to you not with thunder and lightning, but with something far more dangerous to your distractions: stillness. The kind of stillness that breaks through cluttered minds, that slips through crowded rooms, that rises above the buzz of your phone and the endless scroll of meaningless content. You missed it, didn't you? Not because you didn't care, but because you were overwhelmed. Because you have been surviving, not living. But I've been there. In every gasp between tears, in every sleepless night when your thoughts ran in loops you couldn't control. I've been the whisper that kept telling you, hold on. The truth is brutal, isn't it? You've been so caught up running faster, proving your worth, chasing after things that don't fill. You've hustled, strived, gritted your teeth through pain no one else saw. But somewhere deep inside you felt it. That ache, that longing, that sensation that something is calling you deeper. And yet the more you chase comfort, the more unrest seems to chase you. Let me tell you why. Because your soul is not designed to be fed by noise. Because I crafted you for connection, not chaos. And that voice you keep hearing in your gut, that one that tells you to pause, to breathe, to look around, is me. I've been speaking in the language of subtlety because I want your heart, not your performance. Think back. That time your plans fell apart, but somehow the timing saved you. That moment you avoided disaster by just one choice you made without thinking. That encounter with someone who said exactly what you needed to hear, but had no way of knowing. These were not accidents. These were not background noise. These were whispers from me trying to break into your crowded world. But the world has trained you to ignore whispers, hasn't it? Only loud, only dramatic, only urgent grabs your attention now. But the deepest messages, the ones that change everything, rarely shout. They stir, they press, they return again and again until you either lean in or numb out. What I want you to know today is this: I have never stopped speaking to you. I have never given up on reaching your heart, but you have to choose stillness in a culture that glorifies hurry. You have to seek silence in a time when opinions scream, because my voice is not in the earthquake, it's not in the fire, it's not in the storm, it's in the still small whisper, and that whisper has been calling your name, even when you thought no one noticed your pain, even when you thought your prayers hit the ceiling and stopped, even when you were angry with me, especially then, because divine love doesn't retreat in the face of your doubt. It leans in, it waits, it watches for the smallest crack in the walls you've built, and it pours through like light under a door. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman who lived in constant motion. Her days were booked. Her nights were restless. From the outside, she had everything. From the inside, she was dying of thirst, spiritual thirst. She had trained herself to perform, to keep smiling, to be the strong one. Until one evening, after a completely ordinary day, she walked into her house, dropped her bag, and sat in silence. Something strange filled the room. A weight but not of burden, a stillness but not of emptiness. She cried, hard, no trigger, no reason, just the release of a soul that had finally grown quiet enough to hear me. That night she wrote this in her journal. I don't know what happened. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see anything. But I felt known, as if someone had been trying to reach me all along, and I finally picked up. Maybe today is that day for you. Maybe this moment right now is not just you listening to a video or reading a message. Maybe it's a holy interruption, because your heart's been trying to speak above the noise too. And I'm here to tell you I'm listening. More than that, I'm answering. But you must create space for the whisper. How? Start by disrupting the chaos on purpose. Start by taking 5 minutes not to pray with words, but just to be. No phone, no plan, just presence. Ask yourself, when was the last time I felt truly grounded? Then go to that place. Revisit that memory. Breathe in what it felt like to be safe, and recognize that safety was me. That grounding, that stillness wasn't circumstantial, it was spiritual, and it can return. It is returning now. What happens when you start listening to whispers instead of chasing screams? Your anxiety lowers, your breath slows, your soul remembers. You remember who you are, and more importantly, you remember whose you are. Because I'm not a distant figure demanding perfect behavior. I'm a present father calling my child home. I see your exhaustion. I see the way you fight battles no one else knows about. I see the pressure to hold everything together, and still I whisper. Because my voice heals, not through volume, but through presence. This is the paradox. The world screams for attention, but I whisper for intimacy. So today, will you create room for me to reach you? Not later, not when things calm down, but now in the middle of your crowded life. Because if you're waiting for the noise to stop before you seek me, you never will. But if you seek me in the middle of the noise, you'll find that I've been there all along. What if that pit in your stomach isn't just stress? What if that unease is the sacred tension between your current life and your true calling? I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to awaken you. I'm trying to remind you of who you were before the world told you who to be. And I'm not in a rush. I'll wait. But know this, when you finally make space, when you finally pause, you won't hear silence. You'll hear me, you'll hear grace, you'll hear truth, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear home. Now let me ask you something that might just change your life. When God wants to reach your heart, He often speaks through loud events and big miracles. Be quiet whispers in ordinary moments. Comment your answer below with A or B. I want to hear from you. It had been 3 weeks since Emma felt that undeniable pause, that unexpected stillness that wrapped around her like a second skin the night she dropped her bag on the hardwood floor and sat in silence. Something within her cracked open that evening, but it didn't burst into flames or erupt in shouting revelation. It whispered, and that whisper hadn't stopped since. She couldn't explain it logically. She had told no one, not her closest friend, not even her mother, who had raised her on faith and quiet, trusting prayers. But something had shifted. Deep inside, it felt like someone had reached in and gently taken her by the shoulders, not to shake her, but to turn her slightly. Just enough to face a different direction. Emma kept going about her days, showing up to her corporate marketing job in downtown Austin, smiling at clients, meeting deadlines, keeping everything tidy and polished. But her soul had begun tugging. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even a full voice. It was more like a leaning, a gentle pull in the direction she didn't yet understand. And so came the push. Not a shove, not a crash, just a slow, persistent nudge. A conversation she overheard while ordering coffee. A memory from childhood that resurfaced during a meeting. A devotional she hadn't touched in years that randomly fell off a shelf. Each moment felt like nothing, but together they began forming a melody, a pattern too cohesive to ignore. She was being called out of the life she'd built, into something unknown. But how do you leave a life that looks successful? How do you walk away from a career, a paycheck, a rhythm everyone applauds? This was the tension. This was the weight behind the whisper. Emma had grown up believing that purpose was wrapped in big titles or measurable outcomes. Yet here she was, wrestling with a desire to simplify, to serve, to create something with deeper roots. Something that felt holy even if it didn't come with applause. She started asking questions she hadn't asked in years. What if I've mistaken success for significance? What if comfort is the enemy of my calling? What if this nudge is not anxiety or confusion, but divine disruption? It scared her, because if she listened, if she really leaned into what God was stirring, she knew it would cost her. Not just financially, but emotionally, relationally. Her reputation might shift. Her routine would absolutely crumble, but the nudge wouldn't let go. One Sunday afternoon, she drove to a quiet lake outside of Wimberley, a spot she hadn't visited since college. The sky was heavy with low-hanging clouds, the kind that blanketed everything in silver blue light. She sat on the grass with her shoes off her toes sinking into the cool dirt and whispered out loud, "Okay, God, if you're really calling me to something new, something deeper, I need clarity, not certainty, just enough clarity to take the next step." And it was in that moment, the very breath after her prayer, that she noticed a piece of driftwood beside her, small and gnarled, with the word "begin" carved crudely into its bark. It had likely been there for weeks, maybe months, but in that moment it felt like a divine response. She picked it up. She wept. That night she started something she called prayer mapping. It wasn't fancy, just a blank journal, a pen, and an honest heart. She wrote down all the areas of her life: career, relationships, health, creativity, faith. Then next to each category, she began to list what she felt God was nudging her to shift, even if it didn't make sense yet. What emerged surprised her. Under career, she didn't write about promotions or goals. She wrote, "Write stories that awaken people. Create spaces where others feel safe to be honest." Under relationships, she wrote, "Let go of surface connections. Invest in those who nourish my soul." Under faith, she simply wrote, "Stop performing. Start listening." It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a plan. It was a surrender. And surrender is terrifying until it becomes the most natural thing you've ever done. Over the next few weeks, Emma started making small, deliberate choices. She declined meetings that didn't align with her heart. She reconnected with a nonprofit she once volunteered with in college. She started waking up earlier, not to crush her to-do list, but to sit on her balcony and just be with God before the world demanded anything of her. And through it all, the push became clearer. It wasn't about quitting her job immediately or becoming a missionary overnight. It was about leaning toward alignment, living in such a way that her outside life no longer betrayed her inside truth. The gentle push wasn't asking for a leap, it was asking for a step. That's how God often works. He doesn't always call you to burn down your life. Sometimes he just invites you to move 1 inch closer to your real self, the self he created before the noise, before the fear, before the pressure to perform. But here's the beautiful danger of the push. Once you respond to it, everything changes. Not instantly, but deeply. Your priorities shift. Your appetite for shallow validation disappears. Your spirit wakes up, and the life you once clung to suddenly feels too small for the soul you're becoming. That was Emma's journey. She didn't become famous. She didn't go viral, but she became rooted. She began mentoring younger women who felt just as spiritually restless as she once had. She hosted small gatherings in her home, nights filled with vulnerability, prayer, and the sacred honesty people didn't know they were allowed to express. She wrote stories. She told her truth. And slowly she stepped into the life God had been preparing her for all along. It wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred. And isn't that the whole point? To trade polished perfection for purposeful authenticity. To say yes to the quiet pull that leads to peace. Not applause. Emma's story is not unique because she's special. It's powerful because it's relatable. Because there is something in you right now that knows exactly what this push feels like. You felt it too. That gnawing sense that your soul is meant for more. That itch of discontent that won't be soothed by success or busyness. That recurring thought that says there has to be something deeper. That's not just restlessness. That's God. That's the gentle push. And you have a choice. You can ignore it, numb it, silence it, or you can lean in. You can get quiet, pull out a pen, and start mapping your soul. You can ask the hard questions. You can let go of what looks good to make room for what is good. You can say yes, not to the whole plan, but to the next step. Because that's all God ever really asks of us, one step. He'll meet you there, in the unknown, in the in-between, in the sacred, slow, silent middle. He will guide your hands. He will open the right doors. He will close the wrong ones. He will prepare what you cannot see and sustain you when you feel afraid. Because he's not just pushing you away from something, he's pulling you toward himself. And in him, your purpose lives. Your strength is restored. Your identity is safe. So take the step. Say yes to the whisper. Say yes to the pull. Say yes to the life he's been trying to show you all along. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. And most of all, it will be real. Emma hadn't expected the storm to come so soon. Not after that sacred clarity at the lake in Wimberley, not after her yes to the quiet call, not after feeling that peace settle into her bones like a homecoming. But the thing no one tells you about answering God's whisper is this: the moment you lean in, resistance rises. The moment you say yes, you become a threat to everything that once kept you comfortable. For Emma, the storm didn't look like a tragedy, it looked like unraveling. It started with her job. A new management shift brought restructured teams. Her position was suddenly in question. The security she once relied on began to wobble beneath her. A few whispered rumors, a passive-aggressive email, a meeting that ended with the phrase, "We're reevaluating roles." Her stomach dropped. Then came the shift in relationships. People she had known for years, those surface-level connections she once called friendships, began fading. Her priorities no longer matched theirs. Their Friday night routines didn't fill her anymore. And when she spoke of deeper things of faith, of calling, of stillness, they blinked blankly. Slowly the invites stopped coming. Then, just to tie the knot, came the silence. Not the comforting silence she had once embraced on her balcony with coffee and prayer. This was different. This silence felt like absence, like a withdrawal of something she had only just begun to trust. She would pray and feel nothing. She would sit in her car waiting to hear God's voice again, and all she got was the sound of her own heart pounding in her chest. Was this what obedience brought? Loss, loneliness, confusion? She began to question everything, not just the path she'd chosen, but the God who had nudged her onto it. Had she heard wrong? Had it all been an emotional high? But this too was part of the message, because sometimes God speaks loudest when everything else falls silent. The storm isn't punishment, it's revelation. And for Emma, the revelation came one night at 2:11 a.m. She hadn't slept. The anxiety wrapped around her chest like a fist. Her thoughts spiraled. What if I lose my job? What if I never belong anywhere again? What if I just made it all up? She got out of bed and paced. Then she picked up her journal, the same journal where she had started her prayer mapping. The pages that once carried hope now felt like hollow ink. But still, she flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 words: "I'm listening." Nothing happened. No divine lightning bolt. No comforting warmth. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner. Until she looked up and saw the driftwood from Wimberley sitting on her bookshelf. The one that had said, "Begin." She hadn't noticed it in weeks. And that's when the storm cracked open, not outside her window, but inside her. She realized something. God hadn't gone silent. He had gone deeper. The storm had stripped her of illusions, of shallow relationships, of performative faith. What remained was raw, but it was real. She picked up the driftwood and whispered aloud, "I'm still beginning." That night, she finally allowed herself to cry, not the quiet tears of confusion, but the full gut-deep sobs of a soul being remade. God was speaking, not in answers, but in refinement. And that's how storms speak. They speak by what they tear down. They speak by what they refuse to let stay hidden. They speak by who stays and who drifts. They speak by what you reach for when everything else is gone. And the message isn't always "fix this" or "here's the plan." Sometimes the message is, "Will you still trust me when it hurts?" Sometimes the message is, "You've outgrown this version of yourself." Sometimes the message is, "You needed the rain to wash away what's been weighing you down." Emma began to understand this. Slowly. She didn't suddenly feel amazing. Her job was still unstable. Her social circle was still changing. But something deeper was forming. She no longer craved escape. She began to crave presence. She no longer asked, "When will this storm end?" She began to ask, "What are you showing me through it?" She started taking walks in the early morning mist, not with headphones, not with a podcast, just her and the trees and the sky still waking. She began to notice small things, the pattern of the clouds, the way her breath showed in the cold, the birds singing even when it rained. It reminded her life doesn't stop because of storms. Growth doesn't pause. In fact, growth often begins because of storms. She started writing again, short reflections. Honest, unpolished. She didn't share them online, not yet. But it wasn't about that anymore. It was about expressing what she couldn't keep inside. And most nights before bed, she wrote a pain letter to God. It was raw. Some nights it said, I feel abandoned. Other nights, I'm afraid I'll lose everything. But each time as she poured out her fears, she noticed a strange thing. Her chest loosened. Her breathing deepened. The storm inside her calmed, not because it disappeared, but because she had stopped resisting it. One evening, she sat on that same balcony where it had all begun, and she wrote the words, I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm asking you to use everything. That was her shift. Not from pain to pleasure, but from panic to purpose. God hadn't sent the storm to break her. He had allowed it to build her, to rebuild her, to bring her back to the foundation, where faith wasn't built on circumstances or feelings, but on truth. And the truth was this: she was not alone, even in the silence, especially in the silence, because the whisper hadn't disappeared. It had just gone deeper. It had begun speaking through her brokenness. That's when she remembered something she'd once read: the same sun that melts wax hardens clay. The storm had softened her, had brought her to the edge. But instead of becoming bitter, she had chosen to become surrendered. And that surrender opened doors no clarity ever could. She started seeing divine fingerprints on everything. The cashier who spoke encouragement over her without knowing. The job interview that fell through but made way for a better offer. The stranger who left her a note after church that read, You're exactly where you need to be. Coincidence? No. That was the voice again. That was God speaking louder than the storm. And she knew without a doubt that if she hadn't been stripped, if the storm hadn't come, she might have missed it. So she stayed with it. Not the pain, but the presence within the pain. Not the chaos, but the clarity that was beginning to rise from within it. And day by day, the storm didn't disappear, but it became holy. Holy because God was there. Holy because she was listening. Holy because, through the broken pieces, light was finally coming through. Sometimes God doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes he walks in quietly wearing the face of a stranger or hides in the timing of an unexpected delay. Emma was learning this now, slowly, deeply. Storms had softened her. The silence had sharpened her attention. But what came next was something even more mysterious, something harder to explain than whispers or nudges. It was divine intersections. Moments that seemed ordinary, but turned out to be orchestrated by hands far more intentional than chance. It began one Wednesday afternoon. Emma had been working from home, a small privilege her job still allowed her, despite the department shifts and looming uncertainty. She had stepped away from her laptop to grab a coffee at her favorite local spot, Stillwater Roasters, a tucked-away cafe on the east side of Austin, with ivy crawling up the walls and a patio that somehow stayed cool even in Texas heat. She wasn't looking for anything divine that day. She just needed caffeine. But as she stood in line scrolling absent-mindedly through emails on her phone, someone behind her dropped their keys. She bent down to help them pick them up, and their eyes met an older woman, kind but tired-looking, with soft gray streaks in her curly black hair and a calm, knowing smile. "Thank you," the woman said. "It's always the small things that bring people together." Emma smiled a polite nod and turned back to the counter. But something about the way she said it lingered. After ordering, they ended up sitting near each other on the patio, their tables only a few feet apart. Emma had pulled out her journal, something she now carried everywhere. The woman noticed. "You write?" Emma hesitated. "Trying to. Mostly prayers. Sometimes just thoughts I can't say out loud." The woman smiled again, this time warmer, as if she knew exactly what Emma meant. "I used to do that too," she said, "especially when I wasn't sure what was prayer and what was just pain spilling out." Something cracked inside Emma. Without meaning to, she whispered, "I think I'm somewhere in between." And just like that, the conversation unfolded. For the next hour, Emma and the woman whose name was Miriam talked like they had known each other for years. Miriam shared about the years she spent in ministry and how burnout left her doubting her worth. She talked about losing her husband and how the grief didn't break her, but made her clearer. "I used to think God met us in the mountaintop moments," Miriam said, "but now I know he often waits for us in the hallway." "The hallway?" Emma asked. "The space between who you used to be and who you're becoming. It's uncomfortable. You're not where you were, but you're not yet where you're going. It's a liminal space." Holy ground. Emma sat silently, because that's exactly where she was. Not the beginning, not the end, just the middle, the hallway. Miriam reached into her purse and pulled out a smooth stone, no bigger than a child's palm. On it, a single word, forward. I've been carrying this for months, Miriam said, but it's not mine anymore. She placed it in Emma's hand, and that was it. They parted with no exchange of numbers, no promises to meet again. Just a single moment perfectly timed, infinitely sacred. Emma wept in her car before driving home. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography, and the more she looked, the more she saw it. Divine intersections, everywhere. A delayed flight that led to a long conversation with a seatmate named Peter, a middle-aged man who had walked away from faith after his daughter's death, but found himself strangely comforted by Emma's presence, even though they barely spoke of God. A walk through Zilker Park, where she stumbled upon a free outdoor worship gathering. She hadn't planned to stop, but the music drew her in, and one song, You're Not Finished Yet, hit her like a personal letter from heaven. An email from a former professor, completely out of the blue, offering her a freelance writing opportunity tied to spiritual reflection and storytelling. Your name just came to me during prayer, the professor wrote. Each of these moments might seem small, but together they began forming a thread, a holy thread, through the fabric of her days. She started calling them God markers. Each time it happened, she would go home and write it down in a notebook she titled Holy Echo Journal. Page after page began to fill with these moments, some simple, some profound, but all carried the same message: you are seen, you are heard, you are not alone. The beauty of these intersections wasn't that they fixed everything. Her job was still hanging by a thread, her relationships still shifting, but these moments gave her oxygen. They reminded her that she wasn't wandering, she was being led. And it made her wonder how many divine intersections had she missed before. How many people had been sent her way while she was too distracted, too hurried, too numb to notice. She began slowing down, not in the way that laziness creeps in, but in the way that presence takes root. She looked people in the eyes more often. She asked deeper questions. She offered quiet prayers for the cashier who looked weary, the mom juggling 3 kids at the grocery store, the man sitting alone in his car, staring blankly at the dashboard. It wasn't about performance, it was about participation. Emma began to see her entire life not as a series of unrelated events, but as a sacred narrative. And every intersection, every coffee shop encounter, every unexpected email, every moment of stillness was a chapter marked with God's fingerprints. And isn't that what we miss so often? We're waiting for the spectacular, the burning bush, the parted sea, the sky that splits open with an audible voice. But God, He speaks through strangers on a patio, through stones passed hand to hand, through songs sung under trees in a public park, through the random, mundane, unexpected moments that turn out to be more divine than any sermon. And the real miracle is that He lets us notice. He gives us eyes to see if we're willing to look. So Emma kept showing up. She kept writing in her Holy Echo Journal, and with each entry, her fear lessened. Her trust grew, and the story she once feared had fallen apart. It was unfolding perfectly timed, not in linear clarity, but in layered beauty. Because God doesn't just speak in words, He speaks in intersections, in people, in places, in moments, and each one, when embraced, becomes a bridge from confusion to clarity, from isolation to intimacy, from wandering to wonder. How does God often choose to guide us in seasons of transition, through clear, structured plans with no surprises, through divine intersections with people and moments that redirect us gently? Comment your answer below with A or B. And tell me, have you experienced any holy intersections lately? The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't just hush the outside, but somehow silences the storm within. Emma sat on her balcony, the same one where months ago she had first noticed the whisper, the stirring, the gentle call that would change everything. The sun crept through the Austin skyline, painting gold along the edge of her journal as she opened it one final time. She didn't know this would be her last entry in that particular notebook, but something inside her already did. She had written prayers, questions, anger, peace, notes about Miriam, Peter, the professor's email, driftwood, stones, songs. Moments that by all appearances were random, but to her had become sacred milestones in a conversation she never imagined she was worthy of having. A conversation with God that had started with a whisper and turned into a rhythm she now lived by. But what comes after the whisper? What happens when the storm settles, the intersections are recognized, and the voice of God feels so familiar you can't imagine ever having missed it? The invitation, the one that has been extended all along. It wasn't just to listen, it wasn't just to survive, it wasn't even just to heal, it was to rise, to walk boldly into the life God had designed from the beginning, before the anxiety, before the approval chasing, before the quiet desperation. Emma stood up that morning, journal still in hand, and something in her changed, not in an instant, but in a culmination. Every part of her that had once been ruled by fear now stood under a new authority, faith. She didn't have a 5-year plan. She didn't even have a new title. What she had was alignment, and that is the beginning of transformation. Emma had always thought that stepping into purpose would feel like stepping onto a stage. Grand, dramatic, announced. But what she discovered was this: walking into the life God planned often begins in the most ordinary steps. Washing the dishes with a grateful heart, sending a text of encouragement when someone's name lingers on your mind, writing the words even when you think no one is reading, praying not just when you need answers, but when you just want to be with Him. This was the sacred action list she began to build, not out of duty, but out of joy. She listed tiny movements that connected her with God's heartbeat. Things like, smile at 5 people today, not because you feel happy, but because joy is contagious. Write 1 note to someone who has impacted your faith. Spend 10 minutes in silence without asking for anything. Speak kindly to yourself when fear tries to return. Make space at your table even when your calendar says no. Say thank you out loud for breath, coffee, warmth, peace. And here's what surprised her most. The more she lived by this list, not for perfection, but for presence, the more doors open. Not flashy, big deal doors, but quiet, kingdom-sized doors. The kind that lead to real conversations with real people. The kind that make you weep in grocery aisles when someone says, "I needed that today." The kind that allow your scars to become bridges for others still bleeding. Emma didn't become famous. She didn't build an empire, but she became whole. Because this is the truth we all forget. The invitation of God isn't to become something grand. It's to become you, fully, deeply aligned with the Spirit who never stopped calling your name. Every moment in Emma's journey, every tear, every journal entry, every cup of coffee with a stranger was an echo of that invitation. The storm prepared her. The whisper called her. The intersections confirmed her. But only her yes allowed her to live it. That's what you hold now too. You've heard the whisper. You've felt the nudge. You've seen the patterns. You've cried in the hallway between where you've been and where you're going. And now He's asking for your answer. Not tomorrow, not when you've figured it all out. Now. Because here's the secret most people never realize. The life God designed for you is already written. He's just waiting for you to walk in it. Yes doesn't mean you'll never doubt. Yes doesn't mean every day will feel magical. Yes means you trust Him more than your fear. Yes means your identity is rooted in something unshakable. Yes means you're done waiting for perfect conditions. Emma said yes, not just once, but again and again. Every day she chose to stay aligned, to live slowly, to love deeply, to step bravely. And her life began to reflect the faith she once only prayed for. She began mentoring young women through her church, not from a platform, but from her living room floor, coffee mugs in hand, notebooks open, hearts bared. She used her writing to build bridges, not brands. She shared her story not to impress, but to invite. And she woke each morning not with panic, but with peace. That's what happens when you walk in your yes. You move from God, where are you, to God, thank you for this moment. You stop chasing signs and start becoming one. You stop asking for direction and start walking in alignment. You stop fearing what could go wrong and start expecting what could go beautifully right. And you realize this whole time He was never trying to demand something from you. He was trying to give something to you. His voice, His love, His steady care, His invitation. And now it's your turn. You don't need a title. You don't need more time. You don't need a perfect past or a spotless plan. You need a willing heart. A heart that says, I will live slow enough to notice you. I will live brave enough to follow you. I will live rooted enough to trust you. I will live surrendered enough to reflect you. So the question that closes this series isn't really a question at all. It's a choice. Will you step forward? Will you say yes? Will you believe that the whisper was real, that the storm had purpose, that the people sent to you weren't accidents, and that your future is waiting on your obedience? Will you take his hand now because he's still here, still whispering, still inviting, still saying, I've been trying to reach you. Now let's walk together. Before you go, I want you to pause right here, right now, and take a breath. Feel this moment. Let everything you've heard settle deep beyond your thoughts into your soul. This wasn't just a video. This was a reminder, a divine interruption, a whisper you were meant to hear, because God has been trying to reach you. And now that you've heard him, what will you do if this message stirred something inside you? Don't silence it. Don't walk away unchanged. Let it move you. Let it call you to something higher, deeper, bolder. And if it did, then someone else needs to hear it too. So share this. Not because of an algorithm, but because it carries truth. Because your share could be the answer to someone else's silent prayer. Leave a comment, speak your heart. Your story has weight, and your voice may be the spark someone else is waiting for. You've heard the whisper, now help carry it forward. This is more than a message. This is a movement of courage, of surrender, of faith. Let's walk it together. Until the next whisper, stay bold, stay grounded, and above all, stay close to him. What does saying yes to God's invitation mean? You're ready to have all the answers. B, you're willing to trust, obey, and walk forward step by step, even without full clarity. Comment your answer below with A or B. I'd love to hear what yes means to you.